Welcome to week 3 of Multiply. Last week we looked at God's global mission for the church, but today the goal is to understand how we can use our individual lives to impact lostness. Oftentimes, when we see and hear just how big our job really is, we doubt that we could ever truly make a difference. But God uses the faith and obedience of his people to change the world, and he has made a way for each of us to spread the light of the gospel. In this lesson, we're going to learn 4 simple truths to help you see how your obedience to God's plan can lead to multiplication. The first truth that we need to understand is that Jesus is the light of the world. We learn this from John chapter 8, verse 12, which says, "Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, 'I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life.'" When Jesus calls himself the light of the world, he declares that he came for a reason, to defeat sin and death. And it's because of sin that our relationship with God has been broken and that all creation has been fractured. But light is always more powerful than darkness, and Jesus has made a way for us to be restored back to God through his perfect life, through his death on the cross, and through his resurrection. Second, the scriptures tell us that when we believe in Jesus, that we become lights in the world. In Matthew 5, 14 through 16, Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." As lights of the world, it's our responsibility to shine. And we do this by sharing the gospel message with those far from God through our words and through our actions. Jesus warns us that we must not hide our light under a basket because every believer is responsible to be a witness for Christ. In the coming weeks, we're going to learn some simple ways for you to communicate the gospel message to others. Third, we should gain confidence in knowing that God has placed you where you are for a purpose. I love the passage in Acts 17, verses 24 through 27, where Paul is sharing the gospel with the people of Athens. He begins by painting this picture of the one true God as the all-powerful creator of the universe who sovereignly determines the dwelling place of men. Here he says, "The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined the allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way towards him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each of us." In these verses, Paul shows us that God has put you where you are for a reason. He has given each of you a sphere of influence to impact with the gospel message. Your family, your friends, your roommates, your teammates, your coworkers, they all combine to create your sphere of influence. And God has uniquely positioned you to reach these people with the gospel message. God has put people in your life who are close to you but far from him. And some of these people are seeking God, feeling their way towards him, hoping to find him. But God's not far from them because he's going to use you to help them find him. The fourth truth that we see is when we desire to live out God's plan for obedience that leads to multiplication, that we get to make disciples, and as we make disciples, the light of Christ begins to spread. Acts 1:8 says, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." It's here that Jesus promises his disciples that they would become witnesses for the gospel where they lived, to their surrounding areas, to places that were close to them but with a different cultural background, and to the ends of the earth. Then the book of Acts unfolds to allow us to see this spread of the gospel actually take place. And it happened because ordinary believers who were empowered by the Holy Spirit learned to carry the light of the gospel wherever they went. This same spread of the gospel can happen today. As you learn to share the gospel and make disciples within your sphere of influence, you create more lights in the darkness. As you teach these new believers to obey the commands of Christ, the gospel then is able to naturally flow into new areas through their relationships. As more and more disciples are made, the gospel spreads to further places, and we're not alone in this work. The Holy Spirit is with you, and He is empowering you to make disciples. So this is the plan that God has given us to leverage our lives to make multiplying disciples. Just remember that Jesus is the light of the world. When we believe in Jesus, we become lights in the world. And God has placed us where we are for a purpose so that we can make disciples and watch the light of Christ spread to everywhere. Now, if we want to put this plan into practice in our lives, then we have to learn to be intentional to build relationships with the people that are around us. 2 questions I want you to ask yourself is, where has God placed you and who is there? When we think about where God has placed us, we need to consider places like where we eat, where we work, where we live, where we hang out, and where we shop. Because we're creatures of habit, we are consistently encountering the same people as we go throughout our lives. But oftentimes we're so busy that we lose sight of the gospel opportunities that Christ has given us each day. By shifting our mindset to where we are intentional in building genuine relationships with people around us, we can dramatically increase the number of opportunities that we have to influence others with the gospel. As you learn to put this into practice in your own lives, I have a few tips that can help you to be more effective. The first tip is to introduce yourself as a person of faith early in a new relationship. From my experience, the longer you go in a relationship without talking about spiritual things, the harder it becomes to ever transition to those topics. What happens is that as we build relationships over time, and we grow more and more worried that gospel conversations could damage our friendship, so we always just keep pushing it off for later. So be upfront with people when you first meet them about how your relationship with Christ is important to you. Now, you don't have to be uncomfortable or awkward to do this. Just know that people naturally talk about the things that are important to them. If you're around me enough, you'll hear me talk about my family, about sports, about fishing, because these things are what's important to me. And if our beliefs are important to us, then they should be a part of our everyday conversations. The second tip is that our goal should be to help others take small steps of obedience towards Christ. Every person that we talk to is going to be on a different part of their spiritual journey, and our job is to help them move closer to Jesus. With this, every small step of obedience should be celebrated. Maybe you have a coworker who's been aggressively against the idea of religion, but then he comes to you at some point and asks for prayer. This is an important step for him because it allows him to open up to hear the gospel message, and we should celebrate these things. Ultimately, our goal is for people to know and to follow Christ, but it often takes time and a lot of little steps for someone to get in that place. So remember, celebrate the small steps and the big steps that God allows you to be a part of in this disciple-making process. As we finish up today, I want you to take some time to practice reteaching this lesson. Every believer needs to understand how their lives play a role in the mission that God has given to us. So it's your job now to teach them. For your goals this week, I want you to continue discipling 2 believers in your life with these multiply lessons. These could be friends or families or neighbors or coworkers. It doesn't matter. You could meet with them once a week and use the check-in, check-up, check-out structure that we've discussed in the introduction video. But we want you to help others grow in their walk with Christ through discipleship. Second, I want you to continue praying for the list that you made last week of the 5 people in your life that you know are far from God. Pray each day that God gives you opportunities to have gospel conversations with them and that He opens their heart to hear His word. In the next 2 weeks, we're going to learn some simple, practical ways that you can share your faith in everyday conversations. For next week's lesson, you're going to learn how to share your story. And then the following week, we're going to talk about how to share God's story. As we finish out today, I want you to remember that you can use your life to see the gospel spread. I look forward to being with you again next time.